My name is Dr. Stephen Kelly. I'm the subject lead for English, and I want to welcome you to our virtual offer holder day today in the School of Arts, English and Languages. How we would love to have you in a lecture theatre and get to meet you in person, but all being well, this is the last throw of the pandemic that we're facing now. Those of you who have the chat open will see the running order from Moira there. She's just posted it. I'm going to just briefly introduce you to English Queens, and then I'll finish my presentation by talking about the running order. Now, of course, Seamus Heaney is the person everyone with Queen's University. And I don't think there are very many universities in the UK that can, many English departments in the UK that can identify a Nobel laureate in their former student body and staff. Kazuo Ishiguro went to the University of Kent. William Golding went to the University of Oxford. But I think it's a measure for those of you who are thinking about other types of universities, other English departments. It's a measure really of the extraordinary reputation of English at Queen's. That Heaney spent much of his life, even after he'd left the university, in conversation with English. And of course, he was one of a number of extraordinary writers across the 20th and 21st century associated with us. And that tradition continues today. I just want to reference four of my colleagues in creative writing: Leontia Flynn, a poet and a winner of the Forward Prize in 2004. Stephen Sexton, you'll be hearing from shortly, talking about creative writing. Stephen won the Forward Prize just in 2019. Garrett Carr, shortlisted for his book about the Irish border in the context of Brexit. And Sam Thompson, a novelist who was longlisted for the Booker Prize. So when you come to Queen's, you're dealing with an English department that is vital, that is exciting, that is energetic, but that is built on extraordinary foundation. And the Seamus Heaney Centre associated with English, of course, and various other aspects of our coverage really draw on those deep roots in our creative tradition. Now, it's not just our staff who are successful writers. We have our students who have recently published their first novels. Keelan Hughes has become a very successful novelist. She graduated from us a few years ago. And Susanna Dickey is an award-winning poet and novelist who graduated just a couple of years ago. So an extraordinary heritage, but a thriving tradition. And that feeds into the work that everyone does in English. Perhaps some of you are familiar with the television series Versailles. Well, that was written by one of our creative writing team. Jimmy McAlevey, who's on the call here, is a major Irish playwright whose plays have been performed at the storied Abbey Theatre. Glenn Patterson, the director of the Seamus Heaney Centre at Queen's, is a noted novelist and cultural commentator. And this book, Where Are We Now, which came out recently, talks about the impact of Brexit on the island of Ireland and on Northern Ireland particularly. But we also have cutting-edge criticism. Andrew Pepper's Unwilling Executioner is a study of the representation of the death penalty in American literature, American crime fiction particularly, and it speaks to the political ramifications of the death penalty as reflected in crime fiction. Michael Pearce's A History of Irish working class writing recuperates a tradition that has been lost, a tradition of working class writers who never entered the centres of culture and so didn't get the kinds of attention that other writers may have done. Moira Hazlitt here is a leading scholar of the 18th century, and in her latest book, Irish Literature in Transition, she's exploring the critical period 1700 to 1780 in terms of what happened to Irish writing and in its relationship with Britain. Landscapes of Decadence by Alex Murray, who's also on the call here, traces that extraordinary mode of writing decadent literature from the late 19th and early 20th century. And in this study, he tracks decadence in terms of its construction of place. There's a very spooky chapter on Wales in that book, which is well worth reading. Mark Burnett is a professor of Renaissance literature, and he has become interested in the ways in which Shakespearean texts are adapted in world cinema, and he's really basically the world's authority on that material. Justin Livingston, no relation to the subject of this particular book, is the author of Livingstone's Lives. This is a study of the famous Victorian explorer David Livingstone. And Jane Lucia, who you'll hear from shortly, writes about world building in Spanish and English spoken narratives. Sorry, my screen's tiny here. And in that book, Jane is applying her expertise in stylistics, a branch of English language study, to assess how world building is achieved in fiction. So I suppose what I'm trying to say here is you've got an extraordinary history in terms of creative writing at Queen's, but you've got a thriving intellectual culture that you will be participating in when you arrive. You do not come to university to passively imbibe what we teach you. Rather, you're involved in shaping the direction of English as a discipline. Now, I want to talk about some of the support that we offer students. Coming to university can be, of course, a challenging experience. It's very different to school. So English several years ago initiated a peer mentoring program. It's pretty unique in the UK, actually, but it's now applied to all of arts, English and languages. And what that does is when you arrive, you're paired up with a student from the second or third year of the degree who helps you adapt to the challenges of coming to university. And they host all kinds of activities. They help you with essay planning and writing skills. And they also express their enthusiasms for the kinds of modules that we teach. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about that from Moira and from Alex in a second. It's not all work, of course. There has to be some play. So the English Society, which has been going now for, I think, over 50 years, is a wonderful organization where students organize events for writers, for poets. They bring the writers to Belfast in ordinary times, of course, and they lead a kind of thriving culture in English that you'll be joining and participating in too. And of course, they organize a formal every year. So there's always an opportunity to put on a nice suit or dress. Now, the challenges of the pandemic, of course, and the challenges of those transitions I've referenced are, extraordinary. But we pride ourselves at Queen's on having one of the most effective student guidance centres in the UK and Ireland. And the care we show to our students, I think, is critical. So if your mums and dads are listening in here with you, what I would say is that our Student Guidance Centre has a whole range of activities, a whole range of mechanisms to make sure you're okay, to make sure that you're making the change to university effectively and that you're thriving. Belfast, of course, is a small, compact city. We are an urban campus, so the university is right in the centre of the city, and it's an exciting place. It's a very young city. It's a very safe city. In fact, believe it or not, it is the safest city in the UK. So we really hope that those of you who have offers with us, we look forward to seeing you next September. So just to finish on today's event then. Next, we're going to hear from Professor Moira Hazlitt on our joint degrees. After Moira, we'll hear from Dr. Alex Murray on English Literary Studies. He's going to take you on a journey through our programme. Dr. Jane Lucia is going to introduce us to English language, and linguistics. And Dr. Stephen Sexton, that award-winning poet I mentioned earlier, is going to introduce us to the work of creative writing. Dr. Carolina Fernandez Quintanilla is going to tell you about employability and careers. We have a final year module on employment that helps you prepare for the workplace. So I think that's a really terrific and unique feature of our degree. As you know, you're going to have some sample seminars, and you're invited to take 2 of those, and you'll be participating with some of our current students. Look, we could talk to you all day about how wonderful the degree in English is at Queen's, but it's best to hear from our students. And we'll finish the day at 1:30 with a Q&A roundtable, talking to our current students, but also answering your questions too. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Professor Hazlitt, who's going to talk to us about joint degrees.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So I am also going to share screen. So if you just pause a minute, I'll bring this up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about joint degrees, because many of you will be holding an offer in a joint, and some of you will have applied to come and study single honours with us. So I want to just say a few things about that structure that might be helpful. And obviously, if you've got any questions, you're very welcome to pop those into the chat. Stephen's going to monitor the chat. I'm only going to speak for a couple of minutes, so I'll be back looking at the chat once I'm finished as well. So hopefully you can now all see that, okay? So I've got a list of the joints. So you may be there somewhere, one of these joints that you're taking, or you may be coming to us as a single honours English student. And what I want to emphasise at the outset is that if you're a single honours English student, you will be doing different aspects of English, and we're unusual in that way because not all English departments have the 3 strands that might be folded within English, and that's literary studies, language studies, and also creative writing. So a lot of students would ask me about how this works, about you know, taking single honours as opposed to joint, and it's really quite mathematical. So you would be, as a joint student, half of your modules would be in English and half would be in your other subject. And so the little illustration of the pie chart here give you that kind of sense. If you're single honours English, you're obviously taking all your modules from within English. If you're a joint, you're taking half and half. And actually increasingly now, particularly for subjects within our own school, there's a possibility of taking major minor combinations. So that means you'd be doing 2/3. Say you're English and French, you might be 2/3 in English, 1/3 French. And there's a lot of flexibility. So I want to say that offhand. Reason why I'm talking to you about this aspect is that I'm advisor of studies for English. So students who want to maybe change their program a bit, might start as joint students, maybe transfer into single honours English. That's quite possible, and that's something that I would talk to you about and oversee. So there is a lot of flexibility. Also, I want to flag up to you that any student at Queen's is allowed to take 1 module per year outside of their home discipline. So that if you're a single honours English student, or indeed if you're a joint student, you can always take 1 module from elsewhere. So I wanted to just stress that initially, that you're very different, obviously, and some of you will come to us and will absolutely have your mind made up that it's only English you want to do. But if you're someone who's a little bit unsure, there's a degree of flexibility there to allow you to explore different possibilities of study as well. So my next slides are really about our modules that we offer. This looks amazingly complicated, but it's what we call our module map. I'm not going to talk in any great detail about this, but just to say that if you accept an offer with us, I will be writing out to you over the summer months. So I will write and I will give you the module map for next year, and I'll talk you through your choices and so on. And I'll do that until you join us in September. And then when you come to us in September, you'll be assigned 1 member of staff as your personal tutor. And that person is there to help guide you through module choices. This module map is color coded. So all the literary studies modules are color coded in kind of purple. So you can see they do dominate. They're the strongest kind of branch of the school. But we have important strengths as well in English language and linguistics. they're color coded as peach, and creative writing is color coded as green. So you can see that there is a double dissertation in third year. That's the, well, I'll come to that in a second. So there's a double dissertation which is coded with the 3 colors there. So it helps you kind of make sense of how you pick your way through the English degree. So these are our first year modules. So a lot of our material at first year is core, because it's really important for you to have shared engagement, to get to know us and for us to get to know you. But thereafter in second and third year is completely free choice, and you're choosing 6 modules across the year. So 3 in first semester and 3 in second semester. If you're a joint, you're taking 2 in English and 1 in your other subject, maybe in first semester, and then in second semester you're switching and you're doing just 1 module in English and 2 in your home. Whereas if you're single honours English, you're choosing all 3 from within the offerings of English. And then we come into stage 3. So this is where I've got the color coded shows that the double dissertation is a double module, and that's there for you to do some independent work. You can choose whatever you wish to do. So if you're in literature, something maybe that you didn't study with us, but that's a particular enthusiasm of yours, you could pick that up in your dissertation. Or if you're language linguistics a student at this point, you've got really interested in English language, you might be doing your dissertation in that domain, or indeed if you're interested in creative writing, you might be doing that. One other last quick thing I'd say about being a single honours student is if you come to a single honours and you haven't named creative writing, you have the opportunity of taking our taster Introduction to Creative Writing in the first year. If you're a joint, unfortunately, creative writing is closed to you just because of the numbers game. Creative writing module is our number 4, our module number 4 at first year. So if you're a joint student, you're taking 3 modules in English and 3 modules from your other subject. So I'm nearly done. My last slide is just to point out that single honours English itself is multidisciplinary. There are components in literature, language study and creative writing, but also you will explore English in such a huge diversity of ways that you'll always be engaging with other disciplines too. Although at school level subjects might be quite separate, you'll find at university level that actually those distinctions between the subjects tend to blur, if not completely break down. So that is that for me, and I'm going to pass over now to my colleague Dr. Alex Murray. So Alex is going to talk a little bit more about literary studies in English in particular.
Okay, great. Thank you, Maura. I'm trying to share my screen, but it seems to be a little bit slow. So I don't really need a PowerPoint. What I'd like to really do is to really talk about what literary studies is and about what we offer at Queen's, but also I think about the great joy and pleasure of literary studies. And it's something that I've been reflecting on over the course of the past few months. Like everyone else, I've been stuck in this office for the past 12 months, and I haven't been able to travel. And I'm an inveterate traveler. I travel at any opportunity I get. But I've been stuck here. But I haven't been stuck, because what I've been doing is I've been traveling through literature. And I think this is one of the great pleasures and joys of studying English literature, is that you will spend so much of your time imaginatively elsewhere, both geographically but also historically. And I think it's what I really love about studying. It's what I loved about studying English literature. It's what I love about teaching English literature, is the ability to move and to move both in time and in space. And so I thought I'd sort of take you through our program a little bit to give you a sense of the diversity of the kind of imaginative travel that you will be able to do over the course of the 3 years that you spent with us. So in the first year, we give you a broad range of options which really introduce you to English literary studies. And one of those is a module that I teach called Reading the Modern City. I teach this with a colleague, Dr. Tom Hume from the history departments, and he's an expert in 19th and 20th century city cultures, and I'm an expert in 19th and 20th century urban literature. And so we take students through 4 cities. So Manchester in the 1840s, where he introduces students to the shock city and to the contexts around the sort of massive growth of the city and its industrial and its industries in that period. And then I look at the novel Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell, a sort of a condition of England novel exploring some of the class-based problems that were emerging in that period. And then we move to London in the late 19th century, and he explores poverty and empire in the late 19th century. And I introduce students to a wonderful, largely forgotten Gothic novel called The Beetle by Richard Marsh, which is about a human-sized beetle which attacks people. It's very, very entertaining. And then we move forward to 1920s, and we cross the Atlantic to Harlem, and we think about the rise of the Harlem Renaissance, this amazing flourishing of African-American literary cultures that takes place during the 1920s and 1930s, before coming back to Belfast in the 1950s, where we look at the rise of urban cultures in Belfast that really follows the sort of post-war expansion of the state and the rise, and also the rise in affluent society. And then I introduced them to the very, very uplifting novel, The Lonely Passion of Judith Hearne by Brian Moore. It's the opposite of uplifting. But these sort of journeys through places and through time, I think, are what characterizes our degree. So in the second year, you will be enrolling in any number of modules. So you might choose to enroll in Mapping the Anglo-Saxon World, where you'll study the literature of the sort of 7th to the 11th centuries and think about the origins of the language and the literature. And then you might move forward to studying the late medieval period with Dr. Stephen Kelly, and particularly focusing on Chaucer. You can then study Shakespeare and Shakespeare in theatre. You can then move forwards to the 18th century and the 18th century novel. Then the 19th century, there's lots of options. You can study Charles Dickens and Charles Dickens's London. You can study utopias and dystopias. You can study 20th century American literature. And then in the third year, I think our options really expand even more in terms of time and space. So we have a lot of options in contemporary literature. So with my colleague Gail McConnell, you can study contemporary poetry, looking at sort of cutting edge poetry. With my colleague Dr. Andrew Pepper, you can look at contemporary American crime fiction, and places like New Orleans and Los Angeles and the sort of urban crime cultures. And then with my colleague, Dr. Steffi Leniher, you can look at contemporary Irish and contemporary Scottish literature. So you're really moving through time and through space, and you're getting to read a wonderful array of literature, and you're getting to really immerse yourself in all these different worlds. And you can do all of that from right here in Belfast. So I think it's a wonderfully enjoyable and pleasurable degree, but it also allows you to think more broadly about whether we can learn from the past, what we can learn from the past, and also how to create, how to develop forms of empathy with those in other times and other places. So it's a really enriching study, and I really hope that you'll come and study English literature with us. But it's only one of the three main planks of study here. One of the other very important ones is English language, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague Jane Lucia, who's going to introduce you to English language here at Queen's.
My name is Dr. Jane Lucia. I am a senior lecturer in English language, and I'm going to talk to you about one of the strands that's been mentioned already. So that's English language. Maybe some of you have covered it at GCSE level. At university level, it is very different. We go into a lot more detail. There's a lot of technical description of the language that we learn, which is a necessary scientific basis, if you like, for then going on to do a lot of the more fun stuff, or what I consider to be the more fun stuff. So in linguistics, when you study English or any language, there are several levels on which it works. So when we speak, of course, we've got all of these levels happening at once, and you might never really have considered or thought about this, but what your brain does when you're producing language is quite fascinating. So when you speak, of course, you've got the speech sounds that you're making and the phonemes, which represent those sounds. So that's phonetics and phonology. As well as that, with morphology, we can study the little parts of words that we put together to make plural or past tense, or those little bits of words that come together with carrying meaning. And next you've got syntax, so how those words are structured in an order that makes some kind of sense. And semantics and pragmatics, which are more to do with meaning, word meaning and sentence meaning, and how do we know what we mean when we don't always say what we mean, which is a fascinating question you look at in pragmatics. For example, irony. I noticed that Alex gave us a bit of irony there. He said the opposite of what he meant. So with those levels of language, there's quite a lot of technical description to learn about how do you describe all of these things. And that's a lot of what linguistics is about. M.A.K. Halliday is probably one of the world's most famous linguists, and he spoke at Queen's University Belfast back in 2013. I had the pleasure of being there at the time. I was a postgraduate. And one thing that he said at the time was, language is everywhere, so linguistics is everywhere. What that makes, why that's interesting for us linguists is, so literature is obviously a very high art form of the language, but with linguistics, you study everything from the conversation that you had with the bus driver that was full of humor and irony to the way that newspapers carry and package ideology in such a way that can change societies or change the way people think. So with linguistics, the world is your oyster when it comes to what kind of texts you want to study or what kind of speech even. Now, Chomsky is another very famous linguist and political commentator who's actually speaking at the Imagine Festival next week on Monday, I think. I have a ticket for that. I'm speaking at the same festival, but I don't think it'll be as well attended as his talk. So as well as being a political commentator, he is a linguist. He hasn't written on that so much recently. And although I don't necessarily follow his school of thought in linguistics, I love this quote from him because it does kind of summarize why I like to study language and linguistics and why I think it's interesting. Some of the stuff I've talked to you about already is all quite technical, but I think once you have the capacity to technically describe how language works, what's infinitely interesting then is describing how language changes and how we have so much creative control over it. So as Chomsky said, better than I can, language is a process of free creation. Its laws and principles are fixed, but the manner in which the principles of generation are used is free and infinitely varied. Even the interpretation and use of words involves a process of free creation. And one thing that I remember learning in first year of linguistics was that how is it that we can learn the rules as children of our language and then infinitely produce new language or new sentences that have never been produced before? And I think that's something that's pretty incredible about language and language study. You learn the rules and the structures, if you like, but then you learn how humans constantly evolve and break them for interesting reasons. I'll give you a little overview of our specialisms at Queen's. So within the English language staff, we have Dr. Mark Richards, who specialises in syntax and structures, and that's a certain aspect of the levels of language that I showed you a moment ago. We have Dr. Simon Statham, who specialises in political and media discourse, so how are meanings packaged in those kinds of discourses and how that might influence hegemonic ideas and social norms, etc. We have Professor Joan Rahilly, who specialises in speech and sound, and I believe she will be taking one of the seminars later, along with a couple of students, so you get to try that out. And then myself and Carolina, who's also going to talk to us today, specialise in language style. You might have already got a flavour of why I like language style, but essentially it's I enjoy creativity in language, so learning the rules and then learning how people break them. And one of the main ways and the most interesting ways that speakers of our language can break the rules is in literature. That's probably the most rule-bending language form there is, so I love to study it as well. So I take a linguistic approach to literature, which is called stylistics. Okay, Moira has also already mentioned the module map. So these modules that I've listed here are drawn from the module map. In year one, all students do Introduction to English Language. That's where we give you a little taster of what's to come, if indeed you feel like you want to study it further. In Introduction to English Language, we pretty much cover all those, an introduction to all those levels of language that I mentioned earlier. Then in year 2, you can go on to study the history of English, studying language change, which is really useful to know if indeed you're studying literatures from different periods where the language, of course, was different. So medieval, Renaissance, etc. We've also got Language and Power, which is Dr. Simon Statham's module and introduces you to how to think about ideology in language and how it's carried there. We've got Foundations for Speech Analysis, more to do with phonetics and phonology. And in the final year then, year 3, you can do my module, Stylistics, Analysing Style in Language. Speech Worlds, a more in-depth look at speakers' output and looking at how language or speech can go wrong in atypical speech. The Structure of English, again, more about syntax, language and the media, and an optional dissertation in English language if that floats your boat. I'm not going to talk too much about careers because I believe Carolina is going to do that next, but just to give it a slant, if indeed you do a BA in English and linguistics, this might give you an edge when it comes to applying for a certain type of postgraduate study. So say linguistics, speech and language therapy, or pathology, or even teaching English as a second language. There are particular jobs that might be more suited to those who have a better understanding of language and linguistics, perhaps in the media, legal and publishing industries, in marketing, advertising, broadcasting, or even editorial work. All English students have the option of taking a placement module, which Stephen mentioned earlier. And myself and Carolina have experience of running this module, which is there for the whole school. But English students in the past have done, when I've looked after this module, we had one who was a marketing assistant at the MAC. I believe she went on to do a marketing master's and is working in London at the moment. There's a few more listed there. I'm just going to mention there was one student of ours who also, through that placement module, was an assistant at UTV. And I've recently heard him, I nearly crashed the car because he was reading the news on Q Radio. So he's gone on to do great things in broadcasting as well. I'll finish up there because I'm going to hand over to Carolina, who'll talk to you more about careers and employability.
Thank you, Jane. I'm going to share my slides.
Carolina, yeah. Can I ask you to pause actually, because of course it's Stephen who's next on creative writing. So you get ready with your slides. Thanks.
Apologies.
No problem. Good morning. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Jane. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. It's lovely to have you here and to be with you, even if we're not in the same place. So I teach poetry and creative writing at Queen's, and I want to tell you a little bit about how creative writing will work over the 3 years you might study it here. It's exciting, it's informative, it's transformative. It's a really important part of your English degree at Queen's. So you might study creative writing over the 3 years of that degree. In your first year, you will take Introduction to Creative Writing. So this is a module that will introduce you to the building blocks and principles of good writing across several genres of poetry, prose, and script writing. Those are the 3 main areas of creative writing at Queen's. So why should you show rather than tell? Why should poems be made of images rather than made of feelings? How do you structure a story or build a world? How does writing for the screen differ from writing for the stage? Every week, you'll attend a lecture on topics like these, followed by a creative writing workshop in which you'll share your responses to writing exercises with your fellow writers, and where you'll learn to give and receive, which is important, constructive feedback on each other's work. And writing does have a perception as being a solitary act, but like playing charades or karaoke, it makes a lot more sense when there are other people doing it. And we're all in this language together. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that. And that's what creative writing at Queen's is going to encourage you to think about, how you use language creatively, expressively, but how you use it as part of a group of people, a group of fellow writers, fellow students, how you use language in society at large. In your second year, then, you'll specialize in individual modules dedicated to poetry, prose, and script writing. And here in this second year, you'll engage with your choice of subject in much greater depth. In poetry, for example, we'll look at how rhyme and rhythm can be used to particular effect, how voice and tone can shape a sense of character, for example. In script writing, I know you might look at how you write for the screen in more detail, how you write a radio play, one of the most transferable, perhaps, kinds of stage performance. There's you, there is sound, there's a production team, there isn't a stage, there isn't a film crew. There are many different ways of making these kinds of arts. And all the while you're doing this, you'll be becoming a more attentive and sophisticated writer, and a wiser reader, and an incisive communicator. And language is very important. With your workshop colleagues, you will be developing all this time a greater appreciation for the power and nuance of language. And the world will become slightly better when there are more people who appreciate that. So you have some responsibilities. In your third year, as Moira has mentioned, you will work on an extended project from October until May. That's the double dissertation she mentions, in one of those genres, so in poetry, in prose, in script. And over this time, you'll have the advice, the encouragement, the expertise of a supervisor, such as those people that Stephen mentioned. I have a great time every year working on extended projects, thinking, how do you start from 0 pages and end up with 30 pages? How do you do that? There's a lot of thought that goes into all of this, and it's great to see the imagination working over this time. So in that third year module, you might write a collection of poems. You might write a complete, finished, wonderful, possibly publishable short story. You might write the screenplay of a short film or a radio play. Jimmy will speak to you a little later about creative writing for script, for the stage, for the radio, for all of those various disciplines. So if you want to be somebody who writes narratives of any kind, and let's remember that narratives are a part of everything. You might want to write poems, you might want to write plays or novels or cartoons or video games, anything that has a narrative in it, that involves character, that involves tone and structure and all of these things. If you want to learn the craft of storytelling, this is where you would start to do it. And this will make you a better reader, it'll make you a better writer, you'll see language differently, but more than anything, I think you'll become a better thinker. And Alex talked about the imagination. We've all been contesting with our own imaginations over this time. Creative writing is circuit training for the imagination. As you'll know, that's a metaphor. We spend a lot of our time talking about metaphors. But however you want to use your imagination after this course, it will be agile. It'll be ready to take you wherever you want to imagine yourself. So that's all I'll say about creative writing for now, but I'm very pleased to hand over to Carolina, who will talk a little bit about careers.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm going to share my slides. Right, so my name is Carolina and I work as lecturer in the area of English language and linguistics. And I run the workplace module, work placements module. So I will be talking to you briefly about employability and careers in English. So the big question on employability is, what do English graduates do, right? So people outside our field might think we will likely go into teaching or journalism, for example. However, an English degree equips you with very important skills that can take you to a really broad range of career paths and professions. So let's look at some of those. For example, here's a list of job destinations that Queen's English graduates have gone into. So for instance, you can go into sectors such as media and communications, teaching, public relations, or the creative arts. Okay, so here on the screen, you can see roles as varied as a theater director, and diplomat, editor, and disc jockey, or speech therapist and HMRC compliance officer, right? So it's really wide-ranging. So then maybe it's a bit of a surprise that an English graduate can end up doing so many different things. And the good news is that you can, right? We can, because one of the main reasons for that is to do with the skills that we develop when we do an English degree. So in a recent article in the Times Higher Education, the authors indicate that English graduates might earn less money than directly vocational courses, for example, nursing or engineering, but that we perform very well in the long term, right? We have sustained employment in the longer term. So that's because of the transferable skills that you will develop during your studies. For example, the ability to work with others in a team, to communicate both orally and in writing, to analyze information, or to pay attention to detail, which is really, really important. So according to the findings of Project Oxygen carried out by Google, the most significant skills for a successful career include communication skills, critical thinking, problem solving, and connecting complex ideas. And all of them are embedded in the study of English. So then these authors concluded that coding might get you a first job, but an English degree makes your career. Okay, so we tend to do really well in the long term, and that is very welcome news. So then it's all about the skills. So doing an English degree helps you to develop key skills for the professions of the 21st century. For example, independent thinking, and we will help you to become independent thinkers, creativity and critical thinking, so you will learn how to think creatively and critically. And I guess you already enjoy reading and writing and all things language, so that's why you're here today. So we will challenge you to be even better readers, writers, and thinkers. So all of that boils down to analytical and communication skills, which you will be developing in the course of your degree. So finally, I wanted to talk to you about the module that I run in the third year. So this is a fantastic opportunity for you in terms of employability and knowing what to do in your degree after you finish your studies. So this module runs in the third year. It's an opportunity for you to gain work experience before finishing your degree and fully committing to your next steps. So that's the key. Before you fully commit to something, you can have this safe environment to test it. So for example, you may realize that what you want to do, what you did in your placement is not really what you want to do after graduation. And for example, one of my students from last year did her placement in a school, and she realized that she wanted to go into special needs education rather than mainstream education. Okay, so she went ahead and now she's doing her master's on that. Okay, so it can be a great opportunity to get practical experience that helps you to confirm what it is that you want to do after your degree. So the module works like this. You do 100 hours in a placement of your choice. And again, we have plenty of variation here. Jane was already mentioning some of the choices of our students. You can go into arts venues, primary and secondary schools, film or media companies, radio stations, publishing house, libraries, theaters, even the charity sector, right? So there is a lot of variation in what you can do. And then on top of this, on top of your work experience, you have the taught component of the module. So that involves key employability aspects, such as how to write a good CV, doing a successful job interview, presentation skills, and also reflective practice. So in a nutshell, with this module, you can gain a better knowledge of your career path and what it is that you prefer, what you like, and what you dislike, which is equally important. And that will be very handy in your final year. So that's all from me, and I will be happy to take questions later on. I'm going to hand over to Stephen, I believe.
Yeah. Thank you, Carolina. So we have a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has any questions for us, feel free to pop up your hand and ask them, or pop them into the chat. My bet is going to be that you're all terribly shy and you don't want to be exposed. But look, we've been exposing ourselves, in a manner of speaking, for the last 45 minutes. So come on, let's hear from you. Moira is pasting some information into the chat there about the rest of the events.
Yeah, sorry, can you see? I'll redo that because the titles seem to have been obscured.
So Imogen is asking, is there an option to study abroad in fourth year? What we typically do, Imogen, is we have an international study program where you would go to the US or Australia for a semester, or you can participate until 2023 in the Erasmus scheme. The Turing scheme has just been announced by the British government, of course, so we'll have to see how that plays out once it's formally launched. But you wouldn't go for a fourth year with us, you would go for a semester typically. Or you could go for a full year in your second year, for example. That's more unusual with students, I have to say. So someone has said, I've received an offer for English, but now I'm thinking that I want to do English with linguistics. Can you change? Well, I'm delighted to hear that Jane convinced you all to do English, and that's Joseph or Alana. Alana has been convinced to do English and linguistics. You can change as soon as you arrive. Joseph, or Alana, I should say. I'm looking at my screen here. You can change as soon as you arrive.
Can I just say something very quickly? You know, as an English student, you will do language and you can do creative writing in your first year. So you don't have to do anything immediately. Come to us, take the modules. You could take all 6 modules in English in your first year, see how you're finding it, and then approach me and I can arrange the transfer once you're with us. So it's not something you need to sort now. All these options are there for you in our first year. Take the time in the first year to see how you're enjoying everything. And the key thing from my talk was really about flexibility, that actually you can make up your mind during that, at that point, you know, so don't worry about changing right now. It's all there. It's all available to you as an English student.
So Rachel has asked a question, which I think is fantastically framed. Queen's University Creative Writing versus UEA Creative Writing. Discuss. Well, before I hand over to Jimmy and Stephen to give their views on this one, I think if we were still in the 1970s, UEA might be a good place to go because you'd be taught by someone wonderful like Angela Carter. Can I recommend UEA over Queen's? Absolutely not. But look, let me hand over to Stephen and Jimmy and hear their views.
Well, I might say one thing, that our colleague of ours who teaches at the university, the director of the Seamus Heaney Centre, is a graduate of UEA, but he teaches with us, which is, I think, an important thing to remember. Yes, UEA has got a good reputation, but I think Queen's has got a pretty impressive reputation. I mean, I come from the poetry side of things, and I remember noting a few years ago, the T.S. Eliot Prize, you might know, is a very important prize. It's the big prize for poetry in the UK. At the time, it had been running for 20 years. And so this was 2013, I suppose, a little while ago. Over that time, 5 of the people who had won it had close connections to Queen's. So a quarter of the people who had won the most prestigious prize in the UK for poetry had close connections to Queen's. So it's not mysterious to me in that regard that I say Queen's. I mean, that's a typical answer. I'm trying to give you evidence, you know.
Jimmy?
I think we're both in the top 10 in the British Isles. We were recently in the Times, Sunday Times guide, Good University Guide. We were number 6, which I was a little disappointed with. I thought we should have been higher. UEA is good. I'm trying to give you an honest answer here. I don't think they care as much as us. I don't think they put as much into their feedback and as much into their personal attention, and I don't think they're invested in your growth as a writer and a person as we are.
Brilliant. I think that's absolutely true. Also, have you visited the UEA campus? It is hideous. Our campus is beautiful. In fact, our campus is described as in the top 10 most beautiful campuses in the UK and Ireland. So you don't want to go to UEA. We've had a question here from Claudia. Hiya, for English, what is the ratio between Lang Lit and creative writing? So Claudia, after first year, as Moira was saying earlier, after first year, everything is up for grabs. So you do some compulsory literature and language modules in first year. Creative writing is optional at first year. And then you can go on and choose whatever modules you wish. Now, this is increasingly quite rare in the UK to have total flexibility after the first year of your degree. It tends to be that there are some compulsory modules at second year and third year. We don't do that. Okay, so you're completely free to choose whatever pathway you want. And I think somebody else asked, what other modules can you take outside the course? Well, what we do is we give you the opportunity to select what are called elective modules from various departments in the faculty. So both within our own school, you can choose drama and film modules, production modules. You can choose history modules. You can do languages. So let's say if you wanted to get a sense of what it was like to study French or Spanish after school, this is an opportunity. So you received an email from me on Monday, just introducing myself and setting up this event. I'll be sending out a list of those modules to you later in the summer. So you'll be able to select, as Moira said, one of those every year if you wish. So there's huge flexibility in this program. That's the key takeaway, and I think it's what makes us distinctive compared to other places.
Can I suggest, Stephen, at this point that we just keep an eye on the time, and
I'm
just
about to wrap up, Maura, because
and just let everybody know that obviously if they join us again in the third session, there'll be lots of time for questions. We can stay online as long as there are questions coming in.
I think Jane has given us a good way to finish up here. She says the UAA campus is a concrete jungle overrun with rabbits. Queen's is a verdant and beautiful red brick university overrun with brown squirrels. Okay, so we've got squirrels, we've got rabbits. I prefer squirrels myself. Okay, so in 5 minutes time, you're going to be able to join some of our sample sessions, and we invite you to take 2 of those sessions, and then please do come back and join Moira and myself at 1:30 for an open Q&A, and we'll have some of our students along then too. Thank you, everybody.